One of the worst nightmares of every parent is losing their spouse and having to raise their kids alone. But imagine being thrown out of your own home by your family just weeks after burying your husband. That's exactly what happened to Ivatar. The family she had married into treated her like a stranger. "You were never meant to be one of us," her mother-in-law, Veronica von Carthen, said with ice in her voice. Ivatar had nowhere to go except a dilapidated house on the outskirts of town. What Ivatar didn't know was that her father had left her something that would change everything. But would it heal the pain of rejection or teach her what family really means? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Now let's continue. Ivatar van Carthen sat on the sagging porch steps of the house on Willow Creek Road, turning Quentin's wedding ring over and over between her fingers. The platinum band caught the late afternoon sun, reflecting memories of a time when love seemed strong enough to overcome anything. The house behind her groaned with age, its weathered white paint peeling in long strips, the corrugated metal roof spotted with rust and holes. This was the house her father had owned. She had met Quentin van Carthen 6 years ago at a community fundraiser where she was volunteering. Ivatar was setting up chairs in the event hall, her natural curls pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a volunteer t-shirt. Quentin had walked in wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, but when he smiled at her, there was nothing pretentious about it. "You look like you could use some help," he had said, already reaching for a stack of chairs. "You look like you're not dressed for manual labor," she replied, but she was smiling. "Then I guess I'll have to be careful." That was Quentin, privileged but never arrogant, wealthy but genuinely kind. Ivatar came from humble beginnings. Her father, Leonard Hayes, had worked as a maintenance supervisor at an office complex, investing every spare dollar into stocks and bonds that never seemed to pay off. Her mother had passed away when Ivatar was 12. Leaving father and daughter to navigate life together. Leonard had dreams bigger than his circumstances, always telling Ivatar that education and smart investments were the keys to breaking generational poverty. Quentin's family, the Van Carthens, owned a real estate development empire that spanned 3 states. His father, Richard Van Carthen, was a calculated businessman who measured success in quarterly earnings and property acquisitions. His mother, Veronica, came from old money and believed that bloodlines and social standing mattered more than character. When Ivatar brought Quentin to meet her father in their modest 2-bedroom apartment, Leonard had welcomed him with genuine warmth and home-cooked food. When Quentin brought Ivatar to the Van Carthen estate for the first time, the reception was frigid. "Community organizing is admirable," Richard had said during that first dinner, his tone making it clear he thought otherwise. "Of course, it doesn't exactly build generational wealth. Ivatar is working toward her master's degree in social work," Quentin had replied, his hand finding hers under the table. "She's dedicated to helping families in crisis. That takes more courage than most people have." Veronica had smiled without warmth. How noble! Despite their opposition, Quentin had married Ivatar in a beautiful ceremony at a botanical garden. Veronica had made it clear she would have preferred a country club wedding with 500 guests from their social circle. Ivatar wore a stunning lace gown with delicate beading, not because Quentin couldn't afford something more expensive, but because she loved its elegant simplicity. The Van Carthen family attended but sat with barely concealed displeasure. Ivatar's father walked her down the aisle with tears of joy streaming down his face, whispering, "You deserve all the happiness in the world, baby girl." The 3 years of marriage that followed were filled with love between Ivatar and Quentin, but constant tension with his family. They lived in a wing of the Van Carthen estate, a compromise Quentin made to help manage the family business. But Veronica never let Ivatar forget she was an outsider. At family dinners, Veronica would make cutting remarks about Ivatar's natural hair, her clothing choices, her background. "Perhaps you could straighten your hair for the charity gala," Veronica would suggest. "We do have a certain image to maintain." Richard was less overt but no less dismissive, often speaking to Quentin as if Ivatar wasn't in the room, discussing business decisions that affected their future without acknowledging her presence. When Ivatar became pregnant with triplets, Quentin was overjoyed. He painted the nursery himself, assembled 3 cribs, and read parenting books cover to cover. Leonard visited often, bringing handmade wooden toys he had crafted in his small workshop. The Van Carthen's reaction was more complicated. "Triplets," Veronica had said, her voice tight. How dramatic. But when Chase, Apollo, and Shelley were born, even the Van Carthens couldn't entirely hide their interest in the heirs to the family fortune. 3 beautiful children with caramel skin, bright eyes, and Quentin's smile. Throughout it all, Quentin stood firmly by Ivatar's side. When his mother made disparaging comments, he called her out. When his father tried to exclude Ivatar from family business discussions, Quentin insisted she be included. Their marriage was solid, built on mutual respect and genuine love. Then came the day that shattered everything. Quentin was driving home from a business meeting when a drunk driver ran a red light. He died instantly. Ivatar received the call while feeding the triplets lunch, and her entire world collapsed in that moment. Now, 3 weeks after burying her husband, Ivatar sat on the porch of her father's old house, homeless and heartbroken. The Van Carthens had wasted no time making their position clear. The day after the funeral, Richard had called her into his office. The estate will be settling Quentin's affairs, he had said, not even offering her a seat. Given the circumstances, we think it's best if you make other living arrangements. Other arrangements? Ivatar had repeated, unable to believe what she was hearing. This is my home. These are Quentin's children. The children are Van Carthens, Veronica had interjected, appearing in the doorway like a specter. They belong here. You, however, never truly did. Ivatar had fought, but the Van Carthens had lawyers and leverage. The wing of the estate where she and Quentin had lived was technically owned by the family trust. Within a week, her belongings were packed into boxes and loaded into a truck. She stood in the circular driveway with Chase, Apollo, and Shelley clinging to her legs, watching as the only home her children had ever known was taken from them. The triplets were too young to fully understand, but old enough to sense that something was terribly wrong. Where are we going, Mama? Shelley had asked, her small voice trembling. Somewhere safe, Ivatar had promised, though she wasn't sure where that would be. The only place she had to go was her father's house on Willow Creek Road. Leonard had passed away 2 years earlier, and the house had sat empty since then. It was small, worn, and in desperate need of repairs, but it had a roof and 4 walls. As the sun began to set, casting orange light across the peeling paint and rusted metal roof, Ivatar heard the screen door creak behind her. Chase emerged, his small hand touching her shoulder. Mama, Apollo is hungry. She slipped Quentin's ring onto her necklace chain and stood, squaring her shoulders. Her children needed her to be strong, even when she felt broken. She had no idea that her father's faith in the future was about to transform their lives in ways she couldn't imagine. The house on Willow Creek Road wasn't just old, it was barely habitable. The first night, Ivatar discovered the electricity had been disconnected. She lit candles and made it an adventure for the children, telling them they were camping indoors. Chase, the eldest of the triplets by 3 minutes, tried to be brave. Apollo clung to his stuffed elephant. Shelley asked when they could go back to their real house. The next morning, Ivatar woke to find water stains on the ceiling and a kitchen sink that only produced rust-colored water. The furnace wheezed and coughed but provided minimal heat. She made a list of what needed immediate attention: electricity, water, heat, food. Her savings account held $3,000, money she had carefully set aside from the small allowance the Van Carthens had given her for household expenses. Quentin had always wanted her to have access to the family accounts, but she had kept this separate, a habit from her childhood when her father taught her to always have emergency money. Ivatar spent the days searching for work, while the triplets stayed with a neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who remembered Leonard fondly and offered to help without expecting payment. The job market was unforgiving for someone whose recent experience consisted of being a stay-at-home mother and occasional volunteer. She applied at grocery stores, retail shops, and offices. Most applications went unanswered. The few interviews she secured ended with vague promises to keep your resume on file. Finally, Rita's Diner on Route 9 offered her a position. The owner, a weathered woman named Rita Kowalski, looked Ivatar up and down during the interview. You ever wait tables before? No, ma'am, but I'm a fast learner, and I'll work harder than anyone else you've got. Rita had seen enough desperate people to recognize determination. Shifts are 7 to 3 and 5 to midnight. You can work both if you want. Tips are yours to keep, but don't expect much. This isn't exactly fine dining. Ivatar took both shifts whenever she could get them, working 16-hour days when Mrs. Patterson could watch the children. She came home smelling like grease and coffee, her feet aching, her body exhausted. But the tips, combined with her small hourly wage, were enough to get the electricity turned back on and buy groceries. The triplets struggled with the transition. Chase started having nightmares about his father. Apollo became clingy, refusing to let Ivatar out of his sight. Shelley regressed, having accidents she hadn't had in over a year. At night, after her late shift, Ivatar would climb into the single bed they all shared and hold her children close, singing the lullabies her father had once sung to her. She told them stories about Quentin, keeping his memory alive even as the Van Carthens tried to erase their connection to him. Ivatar attempted to maintain contact with the Van Carthen family for the children's sake. She called multiple times, asking if Richard and Veronica wanted to see their grandchildren. The responses were cold and brief. "The children are better off making a clean break," Veronica said during one particularly painful call. "Dragging them back and forth between two worlds will only confuse them." "They're your grandchildren," Ivatar protested. "They're reminders of a mistake," Veronica replied before hanging up. Weeks turned into months. Ivatar learned to stretch every dollar. She shopped at discount stores, bought day-old bread, and made meals from inexpensive ingredients. The children wore clothes from thrift stores. She cut their hair herself, watching YouTube tutorials on her cracked phone screen. The house remained in disrepair. She patched leaks with duct tape and trash bags. She stuffed towels under doors to keep out drafts. She learned to fix the temperamental furnace through trial and error. Despite their circumstances, Ivatar maintained certain standards. The children bathed every night, even when the water heater only produced lukewarm water. Their clothes were always clean, even if they were secondhand. She read to them every evening, books borrowed from the public library. She taught them their father's favorite songs and told them stories about the Van Carthen family history, not out of bitterness, but because she believed they deserved to know where they came from. There were small, bright moments. Chase discovered he loved helping Mrs. Patterson tend her vegetable garden. Apollo found a collection of his grandfather Leonard's old books and spent hours looking at the pictures. Shelley made friends with the neighbor's dog, a scruffy terrier named Biscuit. Rita at the diner became an unexpected ally, often sending Ivatar home with leftover food and occasionally slipping her an extra 20 when tips were slow. As difficult as life was, Ivatar found herself developing a different kind of strength. She was no longer the woman who depended on her husband's family for shelter and security. She was making her own way, providing for her children through sheer determination and hard work. One evening, while searching through boxes of her father's belongings stored in the basement, Ivatar found old file folders filled with stock certificates and property documents. She flipped through them briefly, seeing names of companies she didn't recognize and investment amounts that seemed insignificant. Her father's handwriting covered the margins with calculations and notes. She remembered how he used to pore over financial newspapers every Sunday, marking companies he believed in. Everyone had thought it was a harmless hobby for a man who worked with his hands. Even Ivatar had gently teased him about his retirement fund that never seemed to grow. She put the folders back, too exhausted and overwhelmed with immediate survival to think about what they might mean. Over the following weeks, Ivatar's phone rang repeatedly from an unknown number. She ignored the calls, assuming they were bill collectors or telemarketers. She had enough stress without dealing with people demanding money she didn't have. The voicemails were vague. "This is Walter Bennett calling for Ivatar Hayes. Please return my call regarding an urgent matter concerning your late father, Leonard Hayes." Ivatar deleted them without listening fully. Her father had been gone for 2 years. Whatever urgent matter existed had probably already been resolved or wasn't something she could help with anyway. 3 months into working at the diner, Ivatar collapsed during her evening shift. Rita found her in the kitchen, sitting on the floor with her head between her knees, tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this anymore," Ivatar whispered. "I'm so tired, Rita. I'm so tired, and I don't know how much longer I can keep going." Rita sat down beside her on the grimy kitchen floor. "You're the strongest person I know, honey. You're going to make it through this. What if I don't? What if this is it? What if my children grow up poor and struggling because their father died and their grandparents threw us away like garbage? Then you teach them that being poor doesn't mean being worthless. You teach them that dignity isn't about money. You're already teaching them that every single day." That night, after putting the children to bed, Ivatar stood at the kitchen window washing dishes in the rust-stained sink. Through the cracked glass, She could see the overgrown yard where her father used to maintain a small garden. The house groaned around her. Settling into the cool night, her phone rang again, the same unknown number that had been calling for weeks. She was so exhausted, so defeated, that she answered without thinking, ready to tell whatever bill collector it was that she had nothing left to give. "Hello? Ivatar? Ivatar Hayes?" The voice was male, older, with a warmth that caught her off guard. "Yes. Who is this?" "Oh, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for nearly 2 months. This is Walter Bennett. I was your father's best friend. We worked together for over 30 years. Ivatar's breath caught. She remembered Mr. Bennett vaguely from her childhood, a kind man who used to come over for Sunday dinners, who had spoken at her father's funeral, with tears streaming down his face. "Mr. Bennett, I'm sorry I didn't return your calls. I thought you were a debt collector." No, nothing like that. "Ivatar, I need you to sit down. Do you have a moment to talk? This is important." Something in his voice made her heart race. She pulled out a kitchen chair and Saturday. "I'm sitting. What's going on?" "Your father and I used to talk about investments constantly. He had this portfolio of stocks he'd been building for decades. Small investments, nothing that seemed significant at the time. I used to tease him about it, said he was throwing good money after bad. I remember. He was always reading financial newspapers, researching companies. Ivatar, your father made me promise that if anything ever happened to him, I would make sure you knew about those investments. After he passed, I kept an eye on the portfolio like he asked me to, and something extraordinary has happened." "What do you mean?" Walter's voice was gentle, as if he knew his next words would change her life. 3 of the companies your father invested in have appreciated dramatically. One developed breakthrough technology, another was acquired at triple its value. The third became an industry leader. Ivatar, your father's stock portfolio is now worth over $375 million. The kitchen seemed to spin. Ivatar gripped the edge of the table. "That's not possible. There's more. That building on Granger Street that your father purchased decades ago. The neighborhood has been completely redeveloped. The building is worth approximately $25 million and generates substantial rental income." "Mr. Bennett, this has to be a mistake." "It's not a mistake, honey. Your father left you approximately $400 million. He believed in patience and smart investing his entire life, and it finally paid off. He just didn't live long enough to see it." Ivatar couldn't speak. She sat at her kitchen table in the house where she had been struggling to survive, and wept. Great, racking sobs that came from somewhere deep inside, releasing months of fear and exhaustion and desperation. Walter waited patiently on the other end of the line, letting her process. "Why didn't anyone tell me sooner?" she finally managed. "When he died, I was told there was just this house and a small savings account. Your father's lawyer handled the basic estate, but Leonard asked me to watch the investment portfolio separately. He wanted it to keep growing until you really needed it. He also, honestly, didn't realize how much it had appreciated in his final years. The major growth happened in the last 3 years, particularly after his passing. When I saw the numbers earlier this year, I knew I had to find you. I've been working 16-hour days at a diner," Ivatar said, her voice breaking. "My children have been wearing thrift store clothes and sleeping in one bed because we couldn't afford anything else. And all this time, I'm so sorry. If I had known your situation, I would have told you immediately. Your father listed your old address in his documents. It took me weeks to track down your current location. Ivatar, there's one more thing. Your father left a letter with me, to be given to you, along with this news. He updated it occasionally over the years. Would you like me to read it to you?" "Yes," she whispered. "Please." Walter cleared his throat and began to read. "My dearest Ivatar, if you're hearing this, then something I barely dared to hope has actually happened. The investments I made, the stocks I held on to despite everyone thinking I was foolish, have finally paid off. I never told you how much faith I had in these companies because I didn't want to get your hopes up. I've seen too many people make promises based on dreams that never materialize. But I also believed, deep in my heart, that patience and research would eventually reward us. This money is not just about wealth. It's about freedom. Freedom from people who would judge you for where you came from. Freedom to make choices based on what's right, not what's necessary. Freedom to give your children the opportunities I couldn't give you. Remember what I always told you. Your worth is not determined by your bank account or your last name. It's determined by your character, your kindness, and your strength. This money doesn't change who you are. It just gives you more tools to be the amazing woman I always knew you were. Use it wisely. Use it kindly. And know that every stock certificate, every investment, was made with love for you and hope for your future. All my love forever, Dad. Avatar pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. Her father, who had lived modestly and worked with his hands his entire life, had been building this future for her. Every stock he purchased, every investment he made, had been an act of faith in her and love for her. Mr. Bennett, what do I do now? First, you take some time to process this. Then, we need to meet. I'll connect you with a financial advisor and an attorney who can help you manage this properly. But Avatar, the most important thing is that you and those grandchildren of Leonard's are taken care of now. You never have to worry about money again. After she hung up, Avatar sat in her kitchen for a long time, holding the phone. The house was quiet except for the sounds of her children sleeping upstairs. The same children who had been asking when they could go back to their real home, who wore secondhand clothes and played with donated toys. Everything had just changed. Closing scene. She walked upstairs and stood in the doorway of the room where all three children slept in one bed. Chase was sprawled across most of the mattress. Apollo clutched his stuffed elephant. Shelley had kicked off her covers, and Avatar gently pulled them back over her. Your granddad loved you so much, she whispered. He never even met you, but he loved you enough to build you a future. And now, Mama can give you everything you deserve. She thought about the Van Carthens, who had thrown them away believing they were nothing, who had treated her like garbage because she came from poverty, who had looked down on her father's memory because he was just a maintenance supervisor. They had no idea what was coming. 3 days after the phone call, Avatar met Walter Bennett in person. She had called Mrs. Patterson in a panic, begging her to watch the children for a few hours. She wore her best outfit, a simple navy dress from her former life, and took 2 buses to reach the small office building where Walter worked as a building engineer. Walter Bennett was in his late 60s, with kind brown eyes, gray hair, and calloused hands that spoke of a lifetime of manual labor. When he saw Avatar enter his modest office, his face lit up with recognition. "You look just like your mama," he said, pulling her into a warm hug. "Leonard showed me pictures constantly. He was so proud of you." Avatar found herself crying again, held by this man who had loved her father. Walter had everything organized in a thick folder on his desk. He spread out documents as they sat down. Stock certificates, property deeds, bank statements, and pages of calculations in her father's distinctive handwriting. "Your father and I met when we were both starting out as maintenance workers at the Riverside office complex," Walter explained. "We were young, ambitious, but realistic about our situations. Leonard used to say, 'We'll never make the big money, but we can be smart with the small money.' That sounds like him. Every month, he would research companies. He'd read annual reports from the library, study market trends, analyze fundamentals. Then he'd invest whatever he could spare, sometimes $50, sometimes $100. Over 30 years, it added up." Walter slid a spreadsheet across the desk. "This is the current portfolio valuation. $375 million in stocks, the Granger Street building and its rental income. $25 million. Total inheritance after taxes and fees, approximately $400 million. Can you tell me about the companies?" Avatar asked, staring at the numbers. "Which ones paid off?" Walter smiled. "Your father's 3 big wins were Phoenix Biotech, Greenfield Energy Solutions, and DataStream Systems. He bought Phoenix Biotech stock in 1998 when it was a tiny pharmaceutical startup trading at $3 a share. He invested $500 total. That stock is now worth over $150 million. How is that possible?" Phoenix developed a breakthrough cancer treatment that got FDA approval 5 years ago. The stock price went from $15 to over $800 per share. Your father held on to it through every downturn, every moment when everyone said to sell. And the others? Greenfield Energy Solutions was a renewable energy company he invested in around 2005. He put in about $3,000 over several years. They became a market leader in solar technology. That investment is now worth approximately $120 million. DataStream was acquired by a major tech company 3 years ago at triple its market value. Your father's $800 investment became worth about $90 million. Avatar couldn't process the numbers. They were too large, too impossible. "How did he know?" she asked. "How did he pick these companies out of thousands?" "Patience and research," Walter said. Leonard looked for companies with strong fundamentals that were undervalued. He wasn't trying to get rich quick. He was trying to slowly, steadily build wealth through companies he believed would matter in 20, 30 years. And he was willing to wait. He lived in a 2-bedroom apartment his whole life. He drove a 20-year-old car. He worked until the month before he died. Because the money was never for him, Walter said gently. It was always for you. Every investment was made thinking about your future, about giving you options he never had. Tell me about the building on Granger Street. I barely remember it. Your father bought it in 1998 for $35,000. It was in a rough neighborhood, mostly abandoned. Everyone said he was crazy, but Leonard believed the area would eventually be redeveloped because of its proximity to downtown. And he was right. 20 years later, the city invested in infrastructure. New businesses moved in. Property values soared. Your father's building is now in a prime commercial district. It's leased to 3 businesses paying top-dollar rent. The property value is $25 million, and it generates about $2 million annually in rental income. Ivatar sat back in her chair, overwhelmed. Mr. Bennett, 3 months ago I was washing dishes in a diner and wondering how I would feed my children. Now you're telling me I'm worth $400 million. How is that real? It's real, honey, and you deserve it. Your father worked his entire life for this moment. He believed in you absolutely, but I can't manage this kind of money. I don't know anything about investments or property management or... That's why I'm going to connect you with people who can help. Walter interrupted gently. Douglas Freeman is an attorney who specializes in estate management. Patricia Hendricks is a financial advisor who helps people manage sudden wealth. They're good people, trustworthy. I've already spoken with them about your situation. Can I see the letter? Ivatar asked. The one you read me over the phone? Walter handed her an envelope, yellowed with age. Inside was paper covered in her father's handwriting. She read it slowly, touching each word as if she could feel her father's love through the ink. When she finished, she pressed the letter to her chest and wept. Walter came around the desk and put a comforting hand on her shoulder, letting her grieve and rejoice at the same time. When Ivatar had composed herself, they spent the next 2 hours going over practical details. The investments would be transferred to accounts in her name. The building's management company would start depositing rental income into her accounts. Walter gave her contact information for Douglas Freeman and Patricia Hendricks. Take your time processing this, Walter said. You don't have to make any major decisions today. But Ivatar, your life is about to change dramatically. I don't want to change, Ivatar said quietly. I want to be the same person, the same mother. You will be. Money doesn't change who you are at your core. Your father lived with this knowledge for years and stayed the same humble, kind man he'd always been. You'll do the same. Before she left, Ivatar hugged Walter tightly. Thank you for watching over this for my father. Thank you for finding me. Leonard was my best friend for over 30 years. Making sure his daughter was taken care of is the last thing I could do for him. But Ivatar, he would be so proud of you. The way you've survived these last months, the way you're raising those children despite everything. That's the real inheritance, the strength and character he passed on to you. Ivatar left the office in a daze. She walked to the bus stop but couldn't remember the route number. She stood at the corner, watching traffic pass, trying to reconcile the woman who had scrubbed diner floors last night with the woman who was now worth $400 million. Her phone rang. It was Rita from the diner. Ivatar, where are you? Your shift started 20 minutes ago. Rita, She couldn't explain. I'm so sorry. I can't make it today. Girl, you can't just not show up. I got a full house and no one to cover Section 3. In the old life, the life that existed until 3 days ago, losing this job would have been devastating. Now, Ivatar realized she never had to worry about making rent or feeding her children again. Rita, I quit. I'm sorry to leave you short-handed, but I quit. She hung up before Rita could respond and started laughing and crying at the same time, standing on a street corner while strangers walked past, completely unaware that her entire world had just transformed. When Ivatar finally made it back to Willow Creek Road, Mrs. Patterson was on the porch with the triplets. The children ran to her, and she swept them into her arms, holding them so tightly that Shelley squeaked in protest. Everything okay, dear? Mrs. Patterson asked, concerned by Ivatar's red eyes and strange expression. Everything's going to be okay, Ivatar said, and for the first time in months, She truly believed it. That night, after dinner of macaroni and cheese made from a box, Ivatar sat the children down at their small kitchen table. "I need to tell you something important about your granddad, Leonard. You know how he used to talk about investments and stocks?" The children nodded. Chase remembered his grandfather showing him financial newspapers and explaining how companies worked. Well, Granddad was very smart about investing. He put small amounts of money into companies he believed would grow, and over many, many years, those investments became worth a lot of money. "How much?" Apollo asked. Ivatar took a breath. "Enough that we never have to worry about bills or food or having a safe place to live ever again. Enough that you can go to good schools and have opportunities Granddad and I never had." "Are we rich?" Shelley asked, eyes wide. "We're secure," Ivatar said carefully. "We have enough to be comfortable and to help other people too. But we're still the same family. We're still us." Chase, always perceptive, asked the harder question. "Does this mean the Van Carthens can't hurt us anymore?" The question broke Ivatar's heart. Her 6-year-old son understood power dynamics better than he should have to. "No, baby. They can't hurt us anymore. We're going to be okay." Over the next week, Ivatar met with Douglas Freeman and Patricia Hendricks. Douglas was a thoughtful attorney in his late 50s who specialized in helping people manage sudden wealth. Patricia was a sharp financial advisor who understood both the practical and emotional challenges of inheriting large sums. "The first rule of sudden wealth," Patricia explained in their initial meeting, "is don't make any major decisions for at least 6 months. Let yourself adjust. But we can make some immediate practical changes that will improve your daily life without raising red flags." "I don't want people to know," Ivatar said immediately. "Not yet. I need time to figure out what this means." "That's wise," Douglas agreed. "Sudden visibility of wealth can bring complications. People asking for money, scammers, even safety concerns. We can keep the inheritance private while making your life substantially easier." Following their advice, Ivatar made modest but meaningful improvements. She had the house properly repaired. New roof, functioning plumbing, reliable electricity, proper insulation, but she kept the exterior looking modest. She bought a reliable used vehicle. Nothing flashy, just something safe and dependable. She opened proper bank accounts and set up trust funds for each child. She paid off every debt, including medical bills from the triplets' birth, that she had been slowly paying down. When Ivatar returned to the diner to officially resign and explain, Rita was confused. "You quit over the phone, then you don't answer my calls for a week, and now you show up looking like you just won the lottery." "Something like that," Ivatar admitted. "I inherited money from my father. Not a lottery, but enough that I don't need to work multiple shifts anymore." "How much we talking?" "Enough to be stable and comfortable. Rita, I can't thank you enough for giving me work when I needed it most. You kept my family afloat." Rita studied her carefully. "There's something you're not telling me, but I'm glad for you. You deserve a break after everything you've been through." Before she left, Ivatar slipped an envelope across the counter. Inside was a check for $100,000. "What the hell is this?" Rita demanded. "A thank you. You fed my children when I couldn't. You gave me dignity when I had nothing. Please take it. This is way more than any inheritance I've ever heard of. My father was smarter than anyone knew," Ivatar said simply. "Please, Rita, you deserve it." For the next several months, Ivatar kept her inheritance largely secret. She made careful, modest improvements to her life. She researched schools for the children. She saw therapists to help them all process their grief and trauma. She started planning the foundation she wanted to create. But she didn't tell the Van Carthens. They had no right to know. They had thrown her away when they thought she was nothing, and she wasn't ready to give them access to her transformed circumstances. That revelation would come in its own time, on her terms. That night, Ivatar sat in her repaired living room after putting the children to bed. The house still looked modest from the outside, but inside it was warm, safe, and functional. She pulled out her father's letter and read it again. "This money doesn't change who you are. It just gives you more tools to be the amazing woman I always knew you were." Her father had been right. The money hadn't changed her core values or her priorities, but it had given her power. Power to protect her children, power to make choices, power to build a future based on her values rather than her limitations. Walter Bennett had been her father's best friend for over 30 years. He had watched over these investments as a final act of loyalty and love. He had searched for her, found her, and delivered her father's gift. She would never forget that kindness, and she would honor her father's memory by using this wealth wisely, just as he had asked. The Van Carthens still had no idea what was coming. They thought she was struggling, barely surviving. They had no idea that the woman they had thrown away was now wealthier than they were. The revelation would come eventually, but for now, Ivatar was content to heal, to plan, and to build the future her father had dreamed of for her. Ivatar didn't immediately transform her life. That night, lying in bed with her children, she thought about what sudden visible wealth might mean. She thought about her father's letter and his emphasis on character over circumstances. She decided to move carefully and thoughtfully. The next morning, she kept to their usual routine. Breakfast was still oatmeal and fruit. The children still wore their regular clothes, but Ivatar felt different inside, as if a massive weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She met with the financial advisor Walter had recommended, a sharp woman named Patricia Hendricks, who specialized in helping people manage sudden wealth. They met at Patricia's office, and Ivatar was honest about her situation. "I have 3 5-year-olds, a house that's falling apart, and a family that hates me," Ivatar said. "I need to be smart about this." Patricia nodded. "The first rule of sudden wealth is, don't make any major decisions for at least 6 months. Let yourself adjust. But we can make some immediate practical changes that will improve your daily life without raising red flags." Following Patricia's advice, Ivatar made modest improvements. She had the house properly repaired. New roof, functioning plumbing, reliable electricity, proper insulation, but she kept the exterior looking modest, not wanting to draw attention. She bought a reliable used vehicle, a practical SUV, that could safely transport her children. Not a luxury car, just something dependable. She opened proper bank accounts and set up trust funds for each child. She paid off every debt, including medical bills from the triplets' birth that she had been slowly paying down. Walter had also connected Ivatar with Douglas Freeman, an attorney who specialized in estate management and helping families navigate sudden wealth. Douglas's office was in a modest professional building downtown, and his calm, thoughtful demeanor immediately put Ivatar at ease. "Walter spoke highly of your father," Douglas said at their first meeting. "Leonard sounds like he was a remarkable man." "He was. I just wish he'd lived to see what his investments became." In a way, he did see it. He saw it in his faith that they would pay off someday. That kind of patience and vision is rare. Douglas opened a folder. "Now, let's talk about how we protect this inheritance and make sure it serves you and your children well." They discussed legal structures, tax implications, and asset protection strategies. Douglas explained everything in clear terms, never talking down to her, always ensuring she understood her options. "The most important thing," Douglas said, "is that you maintain control. This is your inheritance, your decision-making power. I'm here to advise and facilitate, not to control." Ivatar took the children shopping, but not at expensive boutiques. They went to regular department stores where she bought them clothes that fit properly and shoes that didn't pinch. The triplets were thrilled with their new things, not realizing their mother could have bought them designer everything. "Mama, can I get the shoes with the lights?" Apollo asked, pointing to sneakers that lit up when you walked. "You can get whatever shoes you want, baby," Ivatar said, her voice catching. The look of pure joy on his face was worth more than any amount of money. Ivatar researched schools extensively. The public school in their district had low ratings and overcrowded classrooms. She could now afford private school, but which one? Patricia connected her with an educational consultant who helped her tour several options. She chose Riverside Academy, a school with a diverse student body and a strong academic program. It was expensive but not ostentatious. The enrollment director welcomed the triplets warmly after their assessment tests. "Your children are bright," the director said. "Chase shows advanced reading skills. Apollo has a gift for mathematics, and Shelley's creativity is remarkable. They get it from their father," Ivatar said softly. "He was the smartest man I ever knew." Ivatar hadn't forgotten the elderly neighbor who had helped her survive the hardest months. She visited Mrs. Patterson one afternoon while the children were at their first day of school. "I need to thank you properly," Ivatar said. "You kept my children safe when I had nothing to give you in return." "Oh, honey, I didn't do it for payment. I did it because it was right." "I know. But please, let me do this." Ivatar handed her an envelope. Inside was a check for $50,000 and documents showing that Mrs. Patterson's mortgage had been paid off. The elderly woman stared at the papers, then at Ivatar. "Child, what did you do? Rob a bank?" Ivatar laughed through tears. "My father left me an inheritance. A big one. You'll never have to worry about money again." Mrs. Patterson wept and hugged her, and Ivatar felt the first real joy she'd experienced since Quentin's death. Ivatar also visited Rita's diner one final time. Rita was behind the counter, looking harried as usual, when Ivatar walked in during a slow afternoon. "Well, look who decided to show up," Rita said. But her tone was more hurt than angry. "You can't just quit like that, girl. Left me in a real bind." "I know, and I'm sorry. But Rita, I already explained about my inheritance." Ivatar slid an envelope across the counter. "I wanted to thank you properly for giving me work when nobody else would." Rita opened the envelope and saw a check for $100,000. "What in the hell? You gave me dignity when I had nothing," Ivatar said. "You fed my children with leftovers and slipped me extra money when you thought I wasn't paying attention. That's worth more than money, but I want you to have this anyway." Rita came around the counter and hugged her fiercely. "You're going to be okay, aren't you?" "I'm going to be more than okay." Despite these gestures, Ivatar remained largely invisible to the broader community. She dressed modestly, drove her practical SUV, and lived in the repaired but still humble house on Willow Creek Road. She had no social media presence, no public profile. Patricia had advised, "People treat you differently when they know you have money. Some become users, some become jealous, some become dangerously interested. Until you're ready to face that, keep a low profile." One important investment Ivatar made was in mental health care. She found a child psychologist who specialized in grief and trauma. Dr. Karen Phillips met with each triplet individually and with them as a group. Chase talked about his nightmares about his father's accident. Apollo expressed guilt that he couldn't remember more about Quentin. Shelley drew pictures of her family that always included 4 figures. Even though one was now gone, they're processing a tremendous loss, Dr. Phillips told Ivatar after several sessions. But they have something crucial, a mother who's present, loving, and stable. That's going to help them heal. Ivatar also started seeing Dr. Phillips privately. In their sessions, she talked about the grief of losing Quentin, the trauma of being rejected by his family, and the surreal experience of sudden wealth. "I sometimes feel guilty," Ivatar admitted. "Like I shouldn't be this fortunate when other people are struggling the way I was 3 months ago." "Your father worked his entire life for this, Doctor," Phillips said. "He denied himself comforts and luxuries so you could have security. Honoring that doesn't require guilt. It requires gratitude and wisdom." 6 months after learning about her inheritance from Walter, Ivatar met again with Patricia and Douglas to discuss long-term plans. She had used the time to adjust, to think, and to decide what kind of life she wanted to build. "I want to do something meaningful with this money," she told them. "My father built this wealth through patience and faith. I want to honor that by using it to help people who are where I was 6 months ago." "What are you thinking?" Patricia asked. "A foundation. Something that helps single mothers, families in crisis, people facing housing insecurity. I know what it's like to stand at the edge and see nothing but darkness. I want to be the light for someone else." Douglas smiled. "Your father would be proud, and Walter will be thrilled when he hears this. He told me Leonard always believed in giving back to the community." Ivatar had remained in close contact with Walter Bennett since that first meeting. He called weekly to check on her and the children, sharing stories about her father that helped keep his memory alive. "Your dad used to say that wealth without purpose was just numbers on paper," Walter told her during one of their calls. "He believed money should do work in the world, help people, create opportunities." "Sounds like you inherited more than his money. You inherited his values. I'm trying to live up to them." "You already are, honey. You already are." That evening, as Ivatar was helping the children with homework, her phone rang. The number was familiar but unexpected, Richard Van Carthen. She stared at the phone for 3 rings before answering. "Hello?" "Ivatar." Richard's voice was formal, controlled. "We need to discuss the children's future. Veronica and I have been thinking, and we believe it's time for Chase, Apollo, and Shelley to have a relationship with their father's family." Ivatar's grip tightened on the phone. 6 months ago, this call would have filled her with desperate hope. Now, It filled her with cold clarity. Why now, Richard? You've had 6 months to call. You've had 6 months to ask about your grandchildren. We needed time to grieve, he said, which Ivatar knew was a lie. But family is important. The children should know their heritage. Their heritage, Ivatar repeated slowly. The same heritage that threw them out of their home 3 weeks after their father died? There was a pause. There's no need to be hostile. We're trying to do the right thing here. I'll think about it, Ivatar said, her voice carefully neutral. I'll call you back. She hung up before Richard could respond. The next day, Ivatar called an emergency conference call with Patricia, Douglas, and Walter. She explained Richard's call and her suspicions. The timing is suspicious, Douglas agreed. 6 months of silence, and now suddenly they want contact. Something prompted this call. I think we need to find out what they really want, Patricia said. Do they know about your inheritance? I don't see how they could, Ivatar replied. I've been very careful. The only people who know are you three, Rita, Mrs. Patterson, and Dr. Phillips. None of you would tell them. Then they're probably fishing, Walter said. They see that you're stable, that the kids are in a good school, and they're trying to figure out your situation. Be careful, honey. People like the Van Carthens always have an agenda. Should I refuse contact completely? Ivatar asked. That might make them more suspicious, Douglas advised. It might also give them grounds to claim you're alienating the children from their grandparents. Better to allow limited, supervised contact while we figure out what they're after. I agree, Patricia added. But set firm boundaries. Make them meet on your terms, in your spaces, under your rules. Show them that you're in control without revealing why you have that control. That evening, Ivatar called Richard back. I've thought about your request, she said without preamble. I'm willing to arrange supervised visits. The children's therapist will need to be present initially to ensure the transition is healthy for them. Supervised. Richard's voice was sharp. We're not criminals. You're people who threw my children out of their home, Ivatar said evenly. Forgive me if I want to make sure they feel safe. These are my conditions. Take them or leave them. There was a long pause. Fine. When can we schedule the first visit? I'll have my attorney contact your attorney with the details, Ivatar said, enjoying the subtle power play of mentioning she had legal representation. Your attorney? Richard sounded surprised. Yes, Douglas Freeman. He handles all my legal matters now. You'll be hearing from him. She hung up before Richard could ask more questions. That night, Ivatar stood in the doorway of the children's room, watching them sleep. Chase was sprawled across his bed, limbs everywhere. Apollo clutched his stuffed elephant, Shelley had kicked off her covers, and Ivatar gently pulled them back over her. These were her children. Not Van Carten property. Not bargaining chips. Not legacy projects. Her children. And she had the power now to protect them from anyone who would try to use them. She thought about Richard's call. The timing was suspicious. The Van Carthens never did anything without a reason. They wanted something, and Ivatar intended to find out what it was before she let them anywhere near her children. Thanks to her father's gift, delivered by his loyal best friend Walter, she now had resources to protect her family. She had attorneys, financial advisors, and most importantly, the confidence that came from knowing she didn't need anything from the Van Carthens. The game had changed. The Van Carthens just didn't know it yet. She pulled out her phone and sent a text to Walter. The Van Carthens just called. They want to see the kids. Your instincts were right to help me keep this quiet. Walter's response came quickly. Your daddy always said patience wins the long game. Stay smart. Stay strong. I'm here if you need me, Ivatar smiled. Her father might be gone, but his wisdom lived on through Walter, through his letter, and through the extraordinary gift he had left her. She was ready for whatever came next. Ivatar threw herself into creating the Leonard Hayes Foundation, named for her father. She worked with attorneys to set up the legal structure, with financial advisors to ensure sustainable funding, and with social workers to identify the most pressing needs. The foundation's mission was threefold: providing emergency housing assistance to families facing eviction, offering job training and education support to single parents, and creating scholarship programs for children from low-income backgrounds. I don't want this to be another charity that just writes checks, Ivatar told the board she assembled. I want us to provide comprehensive support that actually changes circumstances. She kept her role as founder quiet. operating through the foundation's director, an experienced nonprofit professional named Harold Santos. To the outside world, Ivatar was just a generous anonymous donor. While building her foundation, Ivatar also hired a private investigator named James Reeves. She met him at his office, a practical space in a professional building. "I need to know everything about the Van Carthen family business," she told him. "Financial status, current projects, any legal issues. I need to understand why they suddenly want contact with my children after 6 months of silence." James was a former police detective with 20 years of experience. He looked at Ivatar with the kind of assessment that came from years of reading people. "You think they want something specific? The Van Carthens don't do anything without calculation," Ivatar replied. "When they threw us out, they were clear that we were liabilities. Now they're calling about family heritage. Something changed." "I'll find out what," James promised. Meanwhile, the triplets thrived at Riverside Academy. Chase joined the chess club and discovered he had a strategic mind that impressed even the advanced players. Apollo excelled in his math class, often finishing assignments before the other students started. Shelley's art teacher called Ivatar in for a conference, not because of problems, but because of Shelley's remarkable talent. "She has an unusual ability to capture emotion in her paintings," the teacher explained, showing Ivatar a watercolor Shelley had created. It showed a family of 4 standing together, bathed in golden light, with one figure slightly translucent, like a ghost or a memory. "That's her father," Ivatar said softly, touching the painted figure. "She's processing her grief through art. It's actually quite healthy." 2 weeks after the first call, Richard called again. This time, his tone was more insistent. "Ivatar, you said you would think about visitation. It's been 2 weeks. Veronica and I would like to see the children this weekend. I'm still considering what's best for them," Ivatar said carefully. "They've been through a lot of change. I don't want to disrupt their stability. We're their grandparents. We have rights." The word rights made Ivatar's blood run cold. "Are you threatening legal action, Richard?" "I'm stating facts. The children are Van Carthens. They have a trust fund, a legacy, a place in this family. You can't keep them from that." "The trust fund you're referring to," Ivatar said slowly, "was that established by Quentin?" There was a pause. "Yes, before his death." "And how much is in this trust fund?" Another pause, longer this time. "That's family business. Family business that involves my children. I have a right to know. $5 million for each child, accessible when they turn 25, Richard said stiffly. "Now, about this weekend." "I'll call you back," Ivatar said and hung up. She sat in her kitchen, thinking. $15 million total for the triplets. The Van Carthens were worth significantly more than that. Why suddenly care about grandchildren they had rejected? 3 weeks later, James Reeves called Ivatar to his office. He had a thick folder waiting on his desk. "The Van Carthen real estate empire isn't as solid as it appears," he began without preamble. "Richard made several aggressive acquisitions over the past 3 years, leveraging existing properties to finance new developments. When Quentin was alive, he was the cautious one, the voice of reason who prevented his father from overextending. And without Quentin, Richard went all in on a massive commercial development project. Office complexes, luxury apartments, retail spaces. He borrowed heavily, assuming the market would continue its upward trend. Ivatar leaned forward. But it didn't. The market softened. Not a crash, but a significant cooling. Richard's new properties aren't leasing as quickly as projected. He's got debt payments coming due and not enough revenue to cover them comfortably. How bad is it?" James slid a document across the desk. "He's not bankrupt, but he's stressed. He needs capital infusion or he needs to liquidate some assets. The problem is, selling right now would mean taking losses. What does this have to do with my children? That's where it gets interesting." James pulled out another document. "Quentin's will establish trust funds for the triplets, as Richard told you. But there's more. Quentin had a significant life insurance policy, $10 million. The beneficiary is listed as his children, held in trust until they reach 18. Ivatar's hands trembled. "I was never told about this. The policy is held by a company that Richard's firm uses for all their executive insurance. The trustee listed on the policy is Richard Van Carthen himself. The implications hit Ivatar like a physical blow. He wants to control that money. If he's the trustee, he has significant latitude in how that money is invested until the children come of age. And if he's in financial trouble, he could use it to shore up his own projects. Ivatar finished. Legal, but unethical. Very unethical, especially since the policy was meant to secure the children's future. But if you have custody and you're not in communication with the family, Richard can argue that someone needs to make financial decisions for the minors. As their grandfather and a successful businessman, he could petition the court for trustee status if he doesn't already have it locked in. Ivatar sat back, her mind racing. The Van Carthens didn't suddenly care about family heritage. They cared about accessing $10 million they could use to solve Richard's financial problems. Can I challenge his trustee status? She asked. You can try, but it would mean revealing your financial situation. Once the Van Carthens know you have money, the dynamics change completely. They'll think I'm after their wealth. Or they'll want yours, James said bluntly. 400 million is a lot more than 10 million. If they're desperate enough, they might try to argue that you married Quentin for money, that you manipulated him, anything to create grounds for a lawsuit or custody challenge. Ivatar drove home slowly, thinking through her options. She could continue refusing contact, but Richard had already mentioned rights and legal action. She could reveal her inheritance and fight for trustee status, but that would expose her to exactly the kind of manipulation and legal warfare she wanted to avoid. Or she could allow limited contact and watch carefully, gathering information while protecting her children. That evening, after putting the triplets to bed, Ivatar called an emergency meeting with Patricia, Douglas, and her newly retained family attorney, Susan Chen. They conferenced by phone since Susan was based 2 hours away. They want access to the insurance money, Ivatar explained, laying out what James had discovered. The question is, how do I protect my children without starting a war? You could offer to take over as trustee, Susan suggested. You're the children's mother and guardian. You have standing. But then I'd have to reveal my financial status, Ivatar said. And I'm not ready for that battle. What if you don't have to reveal everything? Douglas said slowly. What if we position you as having received a modest inheritance, enough to be stable but not wealthy? We could offer a compromise. You'll allow supervised visitation with the grandparents, but you want joint trustee status on Quentin's insurance policy. Joint trustees would prevent Richard from unilaterally using the money, Patricia added. He'd need your signature on any investment decisions. And if he refuses? Ivatar asked. Then his true motives become clear, Susan said. A grandfather who genuinely wants a relationship with his grandchildren wouldn't refuse their mother's reasonable request for financial oversight. The next day, Ivatar called Richard. She had rehearsed what she would say, keeping her voice calm and reasonable. Richard, I've thought about your request for visitation. I'm willing to arrange supervised visits with the children's therapist present initially to ensure the transition is healthy for them. Supervised? Richard's voice was sharp. We're not criminals. You're people who threw my children out of their home, Ivatar said evenly. Forgive me if I want to make sure they feel safe. This is my condition. There was a long pause. Fine. What else? I want joint trustee status on Quentin's life insurance policy. I'm their mother. I should have oversight on how their money is invested. The pause was even longer this time. That's not necessary. The money is being professionally managed. Then you should have no objection to adding me as a trustee, unless there's a reason you want sole control. This is about trust, Ivatar. Do you trust me to act in my grandchildren's best interest? Trust is earned, Richard. You lost mine when you evicted us. If you want to rebuild it, transparency is a good start. Richard's voice went cold. I'll have our attorney draft documentation for joint trustee status. But understand this, Ivatar. Those children are Van Carthens. They have a legacy and a position in this family. You may have given birth to them, but that doesn't make you equal to generations of family history and achievement. Those children, Ivatar said quietly, are also part of the Leonard Hayes legacy, and you have no idea what that means. She hung up before Richard could respond. That night, Ivatar couldn't sleep. She stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the quiet street. The house that had once felt like a symbol of her failure now felt like a fortress. She had rebuilt her life here, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck, before she even knew about her inheritance. The Van Carthens thought they could manipulate her because they saw her as poor and powerless. They had no idea that she now had the resources to fight them on any battlefield they chose. But more importantly, They had no idea that poverty had taught her something wealth never could: resilience, strategy, and the absolute clarity that comes from having nothing left to lose. The next morning, Ivatar sat down with Chase, Apollo, and Shelley at breakfast. They were eating pancakes, a weekend treat that still felt special, even though she could now afford any breakfast they wanted. "I need to talk to you three about something important," she began. "Your grandparents, your daddy's parents, want to visit with you." Chase looked up, his expression cautious. "The ones who made us leave the big house?" "Yes, those grandparents." "I don't want to see them," Shelley said immediately, her small face set in stubborn lines. "They were mean to you, Mama. They hurt you," Apollo added, his voice soft but certain. Ivatar's heart broke and swelled at the same time. Her children, so young, but already so fiercely protective of her. "I know they hurt me," she said carefully, "but they're still your family. They're your daddy's parents, and part of knowing who your daddy was means knowing where he came from. I think we should give them a chance, but we'll do it carefully. Dr. Phillips will be there with us, and if at any time you feel uncomfortable, we'll stop. Okay?" Chase, the natural leader of the three, looked at his siblings, then back at his mother. "If you think it's okay, Mama, then we'll try." As the children ran outside to play, Ivatar cleaned up the breakfast dishes. Through the window, she watched them chase each other around the yard, their laughter carrying on the morning breeze. They were happy, healthy, and secure. The Van Carthens wanted to use them as pawns in a financial game, but Ivatar had played her own game of survival for 6 months, working double shifts and stretching every dollar. She knew how to strategize. She knew how to be patient. And unlike the Van Carthens, she knew what it was like to have nothing, which meant she knew exactly how much she was willing to sacrifice to protect everything that mattered. The war was coming. But this time, Ivatar wouldn't be fighting from a position of weakness. This time, she held all the cards. She just had to decide when to play them. The visitation was scheduled for the following Saturday at Dr. Phillips' office, neutral territory. Ivatar spent the week preparing the triplets, working with their therapist to help them understand what to expect. "Your grandparents might ask you questions about where we live and what we do," Ivatar explained during one of these prep sessions. "You can answer honestly, but remember that some things are private family business." "Like how much money we have?" Chase asked. At 6 years old, he was remarkably perceptive. "Exactly like that. We don't need to talk about money with anyone outside our family." Dr. Phillips added, "And remember, if you feel uncomfortable at any time, you can ask to take a break. You can come sit with your mom. You're in control of this situation." Saturday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth. Ivatar dressed the children in nice but not expensive clothes. Chase in khaki pants and a polo shirt, Apollo in similar attire with a different color, Shelley in a simple dress with leggings. She wanted them to look well cared for but not wealthy. She wore a modest dress herself, professional but plain, with minimal jewelry. Just her wedding ring and small earrings. On the drive to Dr. Phillips' office, the children were unusually quiet. Shelley held her stuffed rabbit tightly. Apollo clutched Ivatar's hand. Chase stared out the window, his jaw set in a way that reminded Ivatar painfully of Quentin. Dr. Phillips had arranged her office to be welcoming but structured. There was a play area with toys and books, a seating area with comfortable chairs, and clear boundaries about the space. She greeted them warmly when they arrived. "Remember what we talked about," she said gently to the triplets. "This is your time. You get to decide how you feel and what you're comfortable with." The Van Carthens arrived exactly on time. Richard wore an expensive suit despite the casual setting. Veronica was dressed in designer casual wear that probably cost more than a month of Ivatar's old salary at the diner. They both looked uncomfortable in the therapist's modest office. The greetings were stiff. Richard nodded to Ivatar without warmth. Veronica's eyes swept over her and the children with an expression Ivatar couldn't quite read. "Children," Veronica said, her voice softer than Ivatar had ever heard it. "It's so good to see you. You've grown so much." The triplets pressed closer to Ivatar. None of them responded. Dr. Phillips stepped in smoothly. "Why don't we all sit down? Mr. and Mrs. Van Carthen, perhaps you could tell Chase, Apollo, and Shelley something about their father when he was young. Children often love hearing stories about their parents as children." Richard cleared his throat. "Your father was very intelligent. He started reading at age 3. By the time he was your age, He was already showing exceptional aptitude for mathematics and business. It was typical Richard, reducing his son to achievements and accomplishments rather than personality and warmth. Veronica added, he loved horseback riding. We had stables at the estate, and Quentin would spend hours with the horses. What was his horse's name? Shelley asked suddenly, her first words since the Van Carthens arrived. Veronica blinked, surprised. His favorite was named Thunder, a beautiful black stallion. Daddy told us about Thunder, Chase said. He said Thunder was his best friend when he was sad. Sad? Veronica's perfectly composed expression faltered. Why would he be sad? He said sometimes he felt lonely. Chase continued, his child's honesty cutting through the careful atmosphere. He said the big house had lots of rooms, but not always lots of love. The silence that followed was profound. Richard shifted uncomfortably. Veronica's hands tightened in her lap. Ivatar said nothing, letting her son's words stand. Dr. Phillips gently redirected. It sounds like Quentin found comfort in Thunder. That's a special bond. Did he have other interests? After an hour of careful conversation, Richard pulled out his phone and showed the children pictures of the Van Carthen estate. This is where your father grew up, he said. And this is where you were born. Do you remember the house? Chase nodded slowly. I remember my room. It had blue walls and cars on the ceiling. That room is still there, Veronica said, just as you left it. All 3 of your rooms are waiting for you. Ivatar felt her spine stiffen. This was the beginning of the manipulation, the suggestion that the children belonged there, not with her. We'd love to have you visit the estate, Richard continued. Perhaps next time, instead of meeting here, you could come home and see your old rooms, play in the yard. We even still have the swing set your father built. Daddy built us a swing set? Apollo's eyes widened. He did. He wanted you to have the best childhood possible. Ivatar interrupted smoothly. That sounds lovely, but let's take things one step at a time. Today has been a big step for everyone. As the session was winding down, Veronica focused on Shelley, clearly recognizing her as the most emotionally open of the triplets. You look so much like your father, she said softly. You have his eyes. Shelley looked at her grandmother with cautious curiosity. Do you miss him? The question clearly caught Veronica off guard. For a moment, genuine emotion flickered across her face. Every single day. Me too, Shelley whispered. Veronica reached out slowly, as if approaching a frightened animal, and touched Shelley's hand. Then we have that in common. It was a moment of real connection, and Ivatar felt conflicted. These were her children's grandparents. They had lost their son. The grief was real, even if their motives were questionable. When the Van Carthens departed, Dr. Phillips sat down with Ivatar and the children to process the visit. How did that feel? She asked the triplets. Weird, Chase said. They were being nice, but it felt like they were trying too hard. Grandma Veronica seems sad, Shelley observed. Like she's crying inside, but not on the outside. Grandpa Richard talks like a teacher, Apollo added. Everything is about being smart or successful. Dr. Phillips nodded. Those are all very good observations. What do you think, Ivatar? I think they want something, Ivatar said honestly. But I also think the grief is real. It's complicated. Most family relationships are, Dr. Phillips agreed. The question is, do you want to continue these visits? The children looked at each other, having one of their silent triplet conversations. Finally, Chase spoke for all of them. We'll do it if Mama says it's okay. But we don't want to go to the big house without her. That evening, Richard called Ivatar. His tone was warmer than she'd heard in months. Thank you for arranging today. It meant a great deal to see the children. They're processing, Ivatar said carefully. It's not easy for them. I understand. Veronica was quite moved by the visit. She's been struggling since Quentin's death. Seeing the children, it helped her. Ivatar felt a pang of sympathy despite everything. Grief is hard for everyone. Indeed. Richard paused. About our previous conversation, regarding the trust, I've had our attorney draw up the joint trustee papers. I'll have them sent to you for review. Thank you. That's appreciated. There is one other matter. Richard's tone shifted slightly. The children mentioned they're attending a new school. Riverside Academy? Ivatar's guard immediately went up. Yes, they're doing very well there. That's an expensive school. How are you managing the tuition? There it was. The fishing expedition. I received an inheritance from my father, Ivatar said. sticking to the partial truth they'd agreed on. Not enormous, but enough to provide stability and good education for the children. An inheritance? I wasn't aware Leonard had any significant assets. He had investments that appreciated more than anyone expected. It's allowing me to give the children a good life. Another pause. I see. Well, that's fortunate. Though if you're ever in need of financial assistance, the family can certainly help. The children are Van Carthens, after all. We're doing fine, Ivatar said firmly. But thank you for the offer. After she hung up, she immediately called James Reeves. They're digging, she told him. Richard asked about the children's school and how I'm affording it. They're going to investigate. Let them, James said. We've been careful. The foundation is anonymous. Your accounts are private. The most they'll find is that you received an inheritance and you're living modestly. Unless you give them reason to dig deeper, they won't find the real numbers. That night, lying in bed, Ivatar reflected on the day. The visit had been difficult but not disastrous. The children had handled themselves well. The Van Carthens had revealed their interest in the family's finances, confirming James's theory about their motives. But something else had happened too. For the first time since Quentin's death, Ivatar had sat in a room with the Van Carthens and not felt small. She hadn't felt like the poor black woman who didn't belong. She had felt like a mother protecting her children, a woman with resources and options, a person of value. The money hadn't changed who she was, but it had changed how she saw herself. And that, she realized, was a kind of power the Van Carthens could never take away. The next morning was Sunday. Ivatar took the children to visit her father's grave, something they did once a month. It was in a modest cemetery on the edge of town, far from the elaborate mausoleums where the wealthy were buried. The triplets each placed flowers on their grandfather's headstone. They had been only 3 when he died, but Ivatar kept his memory alive through stories. Granddad would be proud of you 3, she told them. You were brave yesterday. You handled a difficult situation with grace. What's grace? Apollo asked. It means being kind even when it's hard, being strong even when you're scared. Your grandfather had grace. Your father had grace. And you 3 have it too. Did we get it from you, Mama? Shelley asked. Ivatar smiled through sudden tears. I hope so, baby. I really hope so. As they walked back to the car, Chase took her hand. Mama, I like our life. I like our house and our school and our friends. I don't want to go back to the big house. You don't have to, Ivatar promised. Our home is wherever we are together, and nobody is going to change that. She meant it. Whatever the Van Carthens were planning, whatever game they were playing, she would protect her children's happiness and security. She had the resources now. She had the strength, and most importantly, she had nothing left to prove to anyone except herself and her children. The Van Carthens wanted their grandchildren back in their world, but those children already had a world, one built on love and resilience rather than money and status. Ivatar would fight to keep it that way. 2 weeks after the visit, a courier delivered a thick envelope from Van Carthen family attorneys. Inside were the joint trustee documents for Quentin's life insurance policy. Ivatar read through them carefully with Susan, her family attorney, on speakerphone. It looks standard, Susan said after Ivatar read the key sections aloud. Joint signature required for any investment decisions regarding the 10 million. Quarterly reports on account performance. Equal access to account information. But, Ivatar heard the hesitation in Susan's voice. There's a clause here, buried in Section 7, subsection D. It states that if the co-trustee is deemed to be making financially irresponsible decisions, the other trustee can petition the court for sole control. Ivatar felt cold. Define financially irresponsible. That's the problem. It's deliberately vague. It could mean anything from reckless spending to unconventional investments. It's a backdoor for Richard to potentially remove you if he can build a case. So it's a trap. Not necessarily, but it's a safety valve that protects him more than you. However, the clause works both ways. If you can demonstrate that Richard is using the funds inappropriately, you could petition for sole control. Ivatar thought about this. Can we add our own language? Something that better defines what constitutes irresponsible behavior? We can try to negotiate. But Ivatar, any changes will alert them that you have sophisticated legal representation. That might raise questions about your resources. Ivatar met with her full team. Patricia, Douglas, Susan, and James. They gathered at Douglas's office on a Tuesday evening. "I think it's time to stop hiding," Avatar said. "Not reveal everything, but stop acting like I'm powerless. The Van Carthens are going to investigate my finances regardless. Let them find out I have money. Let them know I can fight them." "That changes the game," Patricia warned. "Once they know you're wealthy, they might shift strategies. Instead of trying to control the children's trust to access money, they might try to access your money directly through the children. Or they might back off entirely," James countered. "Wealthy people fight other wealthy people differently than they fight poor people. There's more mutual respect, strange as that sounds. Right now, they see Avatar as someone they can manipulate. If they see her as a peer, they might negotiate more fairly." Douglas nodded slowly. "There's also the matter of time. You've been hiding your inheritance for 7 months now. The longer you wait, the more suspicious it looks when the truth inevitably comes out. Better to control the narrative." "How do we do that?" Avatar asked. Susan pulled out a notepad. "We request modifications to the trust document. Professional, reasonable modifications that any competent attorney would recommend. When their lawyers push back and ask why you need such sophisticated changes, we simply state that your inheritance has allowed you to retain proper legal representation. We don't specify amounts. We let them wonder." Susan drafted a response to the trust documents, requesting 4 specific modifications, all reasonable protections for both parties. The language was professional and firm, the work of an expensive attorney. When Richard received the modified documents, he called Avatar directly. "Your attorney made some interesting suggestions," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Susan is very thorough. I wanted to make sure the trust protects everyone's interests, including the children's." "Susan Chen from Whitfield and Associates. I looked her up. She's not cheap. She's worth every penny." There was a long pause. "Avatar, perhaps we should meet. Without attorneys, without therapists, just you and me, discussing our grandchildren's future." Every instinct told Avatar this was a setup, but refusing would look defensive. "I'm willing to meet, but I'll be recording our conversation, just so we're both clear on what's discussed." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Richard said, and Avatar detected what might have been grudging respect in his voice. They met at a quiet restaurant in the business district. Richard arrived in his Mercedes. Avatar pulled up in her practical SUV, but carried a designer handbag that Patricia had insisted she buy, a subtle signal that she had resources. Richard noticed the bag immediately. His eyes also took in her outfit. Expensive but understated. The kind of clothes that don't advertise their cost but signal quality to those who know. "You look well," he said as they sat down. "I am well. The children are thriving. We've built a good life." They ordered lunch, and for the first few minutes, kept the conversation on safe topics. Then Richard leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I underestimated you," he said finally. "When Quentin first brought you home, I saw a young woman from a modest background. I assumed you lacked the sophistication to navigate our world." "You assumed I was after your money," Avatar said bluntly. "Yes," Richard admitted. "And when Quentin died and you seemed to have nothing, I thought I'd been proven right. You took what you could get while it lasted. Except I'm not destitute." "No, you're not." Which raises interesting questions. Your father's inheritance must have been substantial to afford Riverside Academy tuition, professional legal representation, and, apparently, designer accessories. Avatar met his eyes steadily. "My father was smarter than anyone gave him credit for. He believed in patient, strategic investing. It paid off." "How much did he leave you?" "That's private family business. Your family business becomes relevant when it intersects with my grandchildren's future. My finances don't intersect with anything except my ability to provide for my children. The trust we're negotiating is from Quentin's insurance policy. That's separate from my resources." Richard leaned forward. "Here's what I think, Avatar. I think your inheritance was significant, but not enormous. Maybe a few million. Enough for stability, but not enough for real wealth. I think you're being smart and cautious. And I think we've both made mistakes in how we've treated each other." Avatar said nothing, letting him continue. "I also think that regardless of our past conflicts, those 3 children are the only legacy my son left behind. They carry his name, his blood, his potential. I don't want to fight you for them. I want to find a way to coexist." "Then stop trying to control their money," Avatar said. "Accept the joint trustee arrangement with the modifications Susan suggested. Give me equal access and equal say. Prove that you see me as their mother and not as an obstacle to manage." Richard was quiet for a long moment. "I'll agree to the modifications with one condition. Let the children spend time at the estate. Not living there, not permanently, but regular visits. Weekends, holidays. Let them know their heritage. And if I agree to this, you'll stop investigating my finances? Stop trying to find leverage? You have my word." Ivatar almost laughed. "Your word means very little to me, Richard. You threw my children out 3 weeks after their father died. You've treated me as less than human since the day we met. Why should I trust you now?" Something shifted in Richard's expression. For the first time, Ivatar saw something that might have been shame. "Because I failed my son," he said quietly. "Quentin wanted us to accept you. He wanted us to embrace those children without condition. He fought with me about it constantly, and I was too proud, too rigid to listen. And now he's gone, and I can't make it right with him. But maybe I can make it right with you." Ivatar studied the man across from her. He was proud, controlling, prejudiced, but he was also a father who had lost his son. The grief in his eyes was real, even if his methods were questionable. "I'll allow supervised visits at the estate," she said finally. "Supervised by me. I'll stay during the visits. If the children are comfortable and happy, we can gradually increase the frequency. But they will not live there. They will not be raised as Van Carthen's first and my children second. They are mine, Richard." Quentin made sure of that. "He did," Richard agreed. "He changed his will the day he found out you were pregnant. Everything to you and the children. Everything." I was furious. This was news to Ivatar. I was never told about a will, because there wasn't much to distribute. Quentin had his insurance policy and a modest investment account. Most of the family wealth is in the business and the trust. He had access to resources but didn't personally own much. "He never cared about money," Ivatar said softly. "No, he didn't. He cared about you. He loved you with a certainty I've never seen in anyone. And that love scared me because it meant he was beyond my control." Richard looked down at his hands. "I'm not asking you to forgive me, but I am asking for a chance to know my grandchildren, to be better than I was with their father." They negotiated details over lunch. Visits would be every other Saturday afternoon, from 2 to 6 p.m. Ivatar would be present. The children could leave at any time if they felt uncomfortable. Richard would accept the trust modifications without further argument. Both parties would stop investigating the other's finances. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't even really peace, but it was a functional ceasefire. That evening, Ivatar called Susan to report on the meeting. "Be careful," Susan warned. "Richard is a skilled negotiator. Everything he agreed to today might just be positioning for his next move. Don't let your guard down." "I won't." "But Susan, what if he's genuine? What if he really does want to make amends? Then that's wonderful. But assume he's not until he proves otherwise through consistent action over time. People like Richard don't change their fundamental nature just because they had one moment of vulnerability." The next day, James Reeves called with urgent news. "I've been monitoring the Van Carthen business finances like you asked. Richard just secured a major line of credit from Delphin Financial, $25 million. So his cash flow problem is solved. For now. But here's the interesting part. The loan is secured against several properties, including the family estate itself. He's leveraging the home where he's inviting your children to visit." Ivatar felt her stomach drop. What happens if he can't pay back the loan? He could lose everything. The estate, the business properties, all of it. And Ivatar, there's more. "I found documents suggesting he's been in talks to sell a controlling interest in Van Carthen Development to a private equity firm. He's trying to generate capital fast. How bad is it really? Worse than I initially thought. He's not just stressed. He's potentially facing collapse. The commercial development that was supposed to be his crown jewel is bleeding money. Office vacancy rates are at 40%. He's scrambling." Ivatar sat in her kitchen after the call, processing this information. Richard's sudden desire for reconciliation made more sense now. Desperate people did desperate things. If he was facing financial ruin, access to the children's $10 million trust would be even more critical. And if he ever discovered she had $400 million, he might try something even more aggressive. "Mama?" Shelley appeared in the doorway, holding her stuffed rabbit. "Are you sad?" Ivatar pulled her daughter into her lap. "Just thinking about grown-up stuff, baby. Nothing for you to worry about." "Is it about the grandparents?" "A little bit. but I'm making sure everything stays safe and good for you and your brothers." Shelley hugged her tightly. "You're the best mama in the world." These moments, Ivatar thought, were what mattered. Not money, not estates, not business empires. Just this: her daughter's trust, her children's love, their safety and happiness. The following Saturday, Ivatar drove the triplets to the Van Carthen estate for their first supervised visit. The children were nervous, pressing against her in the SUV's back seat. The estate looked the same as Ivatar remembered: imposing, immaculate, intimidating. The circular driveway, the manicured lawns, the house that spoke of generations of wealth and privilege. She parked and helped the children out. Veronica answered the door herself, dressed casually but expensively. Her eyes swept over Ivatar with an expression that was less hostile than before but still evaluating. "Welcome," she said. "Please, come in." The children clung to Ivatar as they entered. The foyer was exactly as she remembered. High ceilings, crystal chandelier, marble floors. This had been her home for 3 years, but she had never felt welcome here. "Would you like to see your old rooms?" Veronica asked the children gently. "We kept them just as they were." Chase, Apollo, and Shelley cautiously explored their former nursery, now converted to individual rooms. Chase's room still had the blue walls and car decorations he remembered. Apollo's room had been painted with clouds and airplanes. Shelley's room was decorated with butterflies and flowers. "We had them redecorated after you left," Veronica explained to Ivatar quietly while the children explored. "We thought, we hoped, you might come back. You threw us out," Ivatar reminded her. "You made it very clear we weren't wanted. I was angry. I was grieving. Veronica's carefully composed expression cracked slightly. "I blamed you for his death. If he hadn't married you, if he hadn't been driving to get home to you and the children, he wouldn't have been on that road at that moment." Ivatar felt like she'd been slapped. "You think his death was my fault? I thought that. In the beginning, when nothing made sense and I needed someone to blame who wasn't dead." Veronica's voice was barely a whisper. "But that was wrong. It was an accident. A terrible, random accident. And I took my pain out on you." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was the closest thing to one Ivatar had ever heard from Veronica. Richard came home from the office early, changing into casual clothes to spend time with the children. They showed him their rooms, and he showed them the stables where Quentin's horse, Thunder, still lived, now old and gentle. The children were tentative but gradually warmed up. Richard seemed genuinely engaged, asking about their school, their interests, their friends. Veronica served afternoon tea with cookies, and for a few hours, it almost felt like a normal grandparent visit. But Ivatar watched carefully, noting every interaction, every question that probed too deeply into their current life, every attempt to create nostalgia for the estate. As they were preparing to leave, Richard walked Ivatar to her car while the children said goodbye to Veronica. "The children seem happy," he observed. "You're doing a good job with them." "Thank you. That school, Riverside Academy. It has an excellent reputation. The tuition is quite steep though, nearly $40,000 per child per year." Ivatar kept her expression neutral. "We manage. Your father's inheritance must have been more substantial than you let on. That's over $120,000 annually just for education, not counting living expenses, clothing, activities." "Why are you calculating my expenses, Richard?" "I'm not. I'm simply observing that you're clearly more comfortable financially than you initially indicated. Which raises the question, why the secrecy?" "It's not secrecy, it's privacy. There's a difference." "Is there?" Richard leaned against her SUV. "Here's what I think is happening. I think your inheritance was significant enough that you don't need the Van Carthen family money at all, which means you don't need us, and yet you're allowing these visits." "Why?" Ivatar met his gaze directly. "Because those children lost their father. They deserve to know his family, his history, where he came from. I don't have to like you, Richard. I don't have to forgive you. But I can put my children's emotional well-being ahead of my own feelings. That's remarkably mature. That's called being a mother." Richard nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, you're nothing like I expected. When Quentin brought you home, I saw someone I thought was using him for access to wealth. I was wrong. You loved my son genuinely, and you're raising his children with integrity." Was that an apology? It was an acknowledgement. I'm not good at apologies. I noticed. Despite everything, there was the faintest hint of a smile on Richard's face. Quentin said you had fire. He was right about that too. As Ivatar was getting the children into the car, Veronica approached with a small wrapped package. This was Quentin's, she said, handing it to Ivatar. His first chess set. I thought Chase might like it. He's showing the same strategic mind his father had. Ivatar took the package, surprised by the gesture. Thank you. I know I haven't been kind to you, Veronica said quietly. I know I've said and done unforgivable things, but watching you with those children today, seeing how gentle you are with them, how patient, I understand why Quentin loved you. It was the closest thing to an apology Ivatar would probably ever receive from Veronica Van Carthen. That evening, after the children were asleep, Ivatar called an emergency conference with her advisors. Richard is definitely probing my finances, she told them. He's calculating expenses, trying to figure out how much my inheritance was worth. He knows it's more than I've admitted. The question is what he'll do with that information, Susan said. If he thinks you have a few million, that makes you financially stable but not a threat. If he discovers you have hundreds of millions, the dynamic changes completely. Should I tell them the truth? Ivatar asked. Just lay it out there and deal with whatever comes. Patricia's voice was firm. Not yet. You still don't know their true motives. Richard's financial situation is precarious. If he knows you have that kind of money, he might try to position himself or the children's trust in a way that gives him access or leverage. Wait until the joint trustee arrangement is finalized and the children are more established in their relationship with their grandparents. How much longer do I wait? Until you have no choice, Douglas said. Until they discover it themselves or until the situation demands transparency. Right now, you still have the advantage of controlled information. Over the next few weeks, the estate visits continued. The children gradually became more comfortable with their grandparents. Chase and Richard discovered a shared love of chess, playing games that became increasingly sophisticated. Veronica taught Shelley how to arrange flowers, something she had learned from her own grandmother. Apollo spent time in the estate library, discovering Richard's collection of mathematics books. The relationships were forming, but Ivatar remained vigilant. She noticed how Richard always steered conversations toward the children's future, planting seeds about private high schools, family business involvement, legacy planning. She noticed how Veronica would casually mention how much space the estate had, how the children's rooms could be redecorated however they wanted. They were building attachment while simultaneously working toward their goal, keeping the Van Carthen heirs connected to the Van Carthen world. 6 weeks after their initial negotiation, the modified trust documents were finalized. Ivatar and Richard both signed, making them joint trustees of the $10 million insurance policy. Ivatar now had equal access to account information and equal authority over investment decisions. This is a good faith gesture, Richard said at the signing, held in Douglas Freeman's office. I hope you see it as such. I see it as appropriate oversight for my children's money, Ivatar replied. But I do appreciate the cooperation. After Richard left, Douglas turned to Ivatar. You handled that perfectly. Professional, firm, not giving an inch more than necessary. I'm learning, Ivatar said. My father used to say that poverty teaches you to negotiate because everything is a negotiation when you have nothing. Apparently, wealth requires the same skill, just in different contexts. That night, Ivatar sat in her living room after putting the children to bed. The house on Willow Creek Road had been transformed over the past months. New furniture, fresh paint, functioning appliances, but it still maintained its modest character. This was their home, their safe place. She pulled out her father's letter and read it again, as she did whenever she needed clarity. This money doesn't change who you are. It just gives you more tools to be the amazing woman I always knew you were. Her father had been right. The money hadn't changed her core values or her priorities, but it had given her power. Power to protect her children, power to negotiate as an equal, power to make choices based on what was right rather than what was necessary. The Van Carthens still didn't know the full extent of her resources. They were still calculating, still trying to position themselves strategically. But Ivatar had learned something important over these past months. Wealth was only one kind of power. The other kind, the more important kind, was the power that came from knowing your own worth, regardless of your bank account. She had that power now, and nobody, not even the formidable Van Carthen family, could take it away from her. The game was still being played, but Ivatar was no longer a pawn on someone else's board. She was a player in her own right, making her own moves, protecting what mattered most. And the Van Carthens were about to learn just how skilled a player she had become. 3 months into the regular visits, Veronica extended an unexpected invitation. The Van Carthens hosted an annual charity benefit for children's hospitals, a major social event that drew the city's elite. Veronica wanted the triplets to attend. It's important for them to understand their role in the community, Veronica explained during one of the estate visits. Quentin always attended, even as a child. It's part of their heritage. Ivatar's first instinct was to refuse, but Chase had overheard and was excited about wearing a suit, like Daddy used to. The other children caught his enthusiasm. "We'll attend," Ivatar agreed. "But I need to be clear. This is about honoring Quentin's memory, not about positioning the children as Van Carthen heirs." "Of course," Veronica said, but Ivatar caught the calculating look in her eyes. Patricia insisted that if Ivatar was going to attend a high society event, she needed to look the part. They went shopping together at exclusive boutiques. "You've been hiding for almost a year," Patricia said. "If you're going to step into the Van Carthen's world, even for an evening, you need to walk in as an equal." Ivatar chose an elegant deep purple gown, sophisticated but not flashy. Patricia helped her select jewelry that was tasteful but expensive enough to signal she belonged. A professional stylist did her hair and makeup. When Ivatar looked at herself in the mirror the night of the gala, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked like she belonged at a society event. More importantly, she felt like she belonged. The children looked adorable in their formal wear. Chase in a polo and matching dark suits. Shelley in a beautiful cream dress that made her look like a princess. The benefit was held at the Grand Pavilion, a historic venue downtown. Ivatar arrived with her children in her practical SUV, which suddenly felt inadequate among the luxury vehicles in the valet line. But she held her head high as they entered. The ballroom was spectacular. Crystal chandeliers, elaborate floral arrangements, tables set with china and crystal. The city's wealthiest and most influential people filled the room, dressed in designer gowns and expensive suits. Richard and Veronica were near the entrance, greeting guests. When they saw Ivatar and the children, surprise flickered across both their faces. "You look beautiful," Veronica said, and for once, it sounded genuine rather than calculated. "Thank you. The children are excited to be here." The evening was a delicate dance. Ivatar was introduced to dozens of people as Quentin's widow, or the children's mother, never quite accepted as one of them but acknowledged because of her connection to the Van Carthens. She heard the whispers, saw the calculating looks. People were trying to place her, figure out her background, determine her worth in their social hierarchy. "I heard she worked as a waitress after Quentin died," one woman murmured to another, not quietly enough. "And now, she's wearing Valentino," the other replied. "Someone's come into money." Ivatar ignored them, focusing on the children. Chase, Apollo, and Shelley were fascinated by everything. The ice sculptures, the orchestra, the elaborate dessert display. Midway through the evening, a distinguished black man in his 60s approached Ivatar. He had an air of quiet authority and genuine warmth. "Excuse me, are you Ivatar? Leonard Hayes' daughter?" Ivatar turned, surprised. "Yes. Did you know my father? I'm Dr. Samuel Wright. Your father and I served on a community board together years ago. He talked about you constantly, was so proud of everything you accomplished. I was sorry to hear of his passing." "Thank you. That means a lot." Dr. Wright glanced around the room. "I heard you married into the Van Carthen family. That must have been quite a journey." "It's been complicated," Ivatar admitted. "Leonard was one of the smartest men I knew," Dr. Wright continued. "He had this absolute faith in long-term thinking, in patience and strategy. I remember him showing me his investment portfolio once, pointing out companies nobody else believed in. I thought he was crazy. Looks like he was a genius instead." He said it casually, but loud enough that several nearby people heard. Ivatar saw heads turn with interest. After Dr. Wright moved on, a woman Ivatar had been introduced to earlier approached. "Your father had an investment portfolio?" she asked with barely concealed curiosity. "That's unusual for someone in his profession." "My father believed in planning for the future," Ivatar said neutrally. "Clearly it paid off," the woman said, eyeing Ivatar's dress and jewelry. "You're obviously doing well for yourself." Before Ivatar could respond, Richard appeared at her elbow. Ivatar, there are some people I'd like you to meet. He guided her away smoothly, but his expression was thoughtful. He had heard the exchange. Later in the evening, during a quiet moment, Richard pulled Ivatar aside. Dr. Wright mentioned your father's investments. He seemed to suggest they were successful. My father was smarter than people gave him credit for. How successful, Ivatar? Because you've been very vague about your inheritance. You can afford this dress. Expensive legal representation, elite education for 3 children. That suggests more than just a modest inheritance. Ivatar met his eyes steadily. Why does it matter to you, Richard? Because I need to understand who you are, what you're capable of. Whether you're a threat. The honesty was surprising. A threat to what? To my grandchildren's future, to their connection with their father's family, to their place in the social structure they were born into. I'm not a threat to anything except people who try to control or manipulate my children. The conversation was interrupted by Veronica, who looked agitated. Richard, we need to talk, now. They moved to a private corner, but Ivatar could see they were arguing. Veronica gestured toward her several times. Finally, they returned, Veronica's face pale. Is it true? Veronica asked Ivatar directly, her voice tight. Did your father's investments appreciate to over $300 million? Ivatar felt her blood freeze. How did you hear that? Elizabeth Cranston just congratulated me on my very wealthy daughter-in-law. She said her husband handles private wealth management and heard about your father's portfolio through industry connections. Apparently, it's becoming something of a legend in investment circles. The maintenance worker who turned pennies into millions through decades of patient investing. The truth was out. Or, at least part of it. Ivatar could see Richard's face processing this information, recalculating everything. Is it true? Richard demanded. Ivatar looked around the ballroom. People were watching them, sensing drama. The children were across the room with a volunteer minding the kids' area, safely out of earshot. Yes, she said simply. My father's investments appreciated significantly. I inherited approximately $400 million. The number hung in the air between them. Veronica actually swayed, reaching for a chair. Richard's face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, anger, and finally, something that might have been respect. $400 million, he repeated slowly. You've had $400 million this entire time? Since about 2 weeks after you threw me and my children out onto the street. Yes. And you didn't think to mention this? Veronica's voice rose. You let us think you were struggling, barely making ends meet. I was struggling and barely making ends meet. Ivatar shot back. Before I knew about the inheritance, I worked double shifts at a diner to feed my children. I lived in a house with a leaking roof and rust-colored water. You didn't care about any of that. You didn't check on us. You didn't offer help. You were happy to let us disappear into poverty. We didn't know, Richard said. You didn't care to know. There's a difference. Their raised voices had drawn attention. People were openly staring now. Ivatar saw Dr. Wright watching with concern. Other guests had pulled out phones, undoubtedly texting about the drama unfolding. You lied to us, Veronica accused. I protected myself and my children from people who had already hurt us. That's not lying, that's survival. You negotiated the trust agreement under false pretenses, Richard said, his lawyer mind working. You made us think you needed access to the insurance money when you're worth 40 times that amount. I never said I needed the money. I said I wanted oversight of my children's inheritance from their father. Those are 2 different things. And every word I spoke during those negotiations was true. I never lied. I just didn't volunteer information you had no right to know. Richard's expression shifted from anger to understanding. The foundation, the Leonard Hayes Foundation that's been funding housing assistance and education programs. That's you. My father's money, used the way he would have wanted. To help people who are where I was 10 months ago. You've been operating a major charitable foundation while pretending to be modestly comfortable. I haven't been pretending anything. I live in my father's old house. I drive a practical car. My children attend a good school, but not the most elite academy in the city. I've been living according to my values, not my bank account. We could have helped you, Veronica said, and there were actual tears in her eyes. After Quentin died, if we had known you were struggling, we would have. Would you? Ivatar challenged. Because, when you threw us out, I told you I had nowhere to go. I told you I had 3 children to support. You didn't care then. Why would you have cared if you'd known the details? Veronica had no answer. Chase appeared at Ivatar's side, looking worried. Mama? Why is everyone staring? Ivatar immediately softened, putting her hand on her son's shoulder. Just grown-up conversations, baby. Are you and your brother and sister ready to go home? I want to stay, Chase said. The desserts are really good. But Grandma looks sad, out of the mouths of children. Veronica wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. I'm okay, sweetheart, she told Chase. Your mother and I just had a disagreement. About the money? Chase asked with alarming perception. The other kids were saying we're rich now because of Granddad Leonard. Is that true? Ivatar knelt down to Chase's level. Yes. Granddad Leonard left us a lot of money, but that doesn't change who we are or what matters to us. We're still the same family. Does that mean we don't have to worry about bills anymore? Like you used to? The question pierced Ivatar's heart. Her 6-year-old son had been aware of her financial stress, had carried that worry himself. No, baby. We don't have to worry about bills anymore. Good, Chase said seriously. I didn't like when you looked worried all the time. He went back to his siblings, leaving the adults to sit with his innocent observation. He was worried about you, Richard said quietly. A 6-year-old child was carrying the burden of his mother's financial stress. Yes. While you and Veronica were comfortable in your estate, my 6-year-old son was worrying about whether we could pay our bills. So forgive me if I don't feel guilty about not sharing my financial situation with you. Richard nodded slowly. You're right. We failed you. We failed Quentin. We failed those children. And now you don't need anything from us. Which means we have no leverage, no way to force a relationship. You never needed leverage, Ivatar said. You just needed to be kind, to see me as a person, not an obstacle, to treat my children as your grandchildren, not as pawns in a financial game. What happens now? Veronica asked, her voice small. Will you cut us out completely? Take the children away? Ivatar looked at the two people who had caused her so much pain. They looked diminished somehow, their power and status suddenly meaningless in the face of her independence. That depends on you, she said finally. I've allowed visits because I believe the children deserve to know their father's family. That hasn't changed. But if you try to use this information against me, if you attempt to manipulate or control my children because of money, either yours or mine, we're done. Permanently. We won't, Richard said immediately. We'll see. Words are easy. Actions matter. Ivatar gathered her children and left the gala, heads held high despite the whispers and stares. As they drove home, Shelley asked, Mama, are we really rich? We're really secure, Ivatar corrected. We have enough money that you never have to worry about having a home or food or going to school. But being rich isn't about money. It's about being rich in love, in kindness, in integrity. And yes, by that definition, we're very, very rich. I like that kind of rich, Apollo said. Me too, baby. Me too. As they pulled into their driveway, Ivatar looked at the modest house on Willow Creek Road. It would never be featured in design magazines or impress society matrons. But it was theirs, bought with her father's faith and hard work. It represented everything that truly mattered. The secret was out. The Van Carthens knew. Soon, everyone would know. The dynamics would shift. The challenges would change. But Ivatar felt strangely free. No more hiding. No more calculations about what to reveal and what to conceal. She was Leonard Hayes' daughter. She was Quentin Van Carthen's widow. She was Chase, Apollo, and Shelley's mother. And she was a woman of substantial means who would use that means to protect her family and help others. The Van Carthens would have to accept her on her terms now, not because she had married their son, not because she had given birth to their grandchildren, but because she was their equal in every way that society measured worth, and more importantly, because she was their superior in the ways that actually mattered: character, resilience, and love. The revelation had happened. Now came the reckoning. The days following the gala were chaotic. Ivatar's phone rang constantly with calls from financial advisors, charity representatives, and society figures who suddenly wanted to meet Leonard Hayes' remarkable daughter. Patricia helped her screen everything, declining most requests. You don't owe anyone access to you, Patricia reminded her. You get to decide who belongs in your life. The story made the society pages. Hidden heiress, Van Carthen widow's secret fortune. The articles were breathless and speculative, getting some facts right and many wrong. Ivatar ignored them all. 3 days after the gala, Richard requested a formal meeting at Douglas Freeman's office. He came alone, without Veronica or attorneys, which was unusual for him. "I need to apologize," he began without preamble once they were seated. "Properly apologize, not just acknowledge wrongdoing. What we did to you and the children after Quentin died was unconscionable. We were grieving, yes, but that's an explanation, not an excuse." Ivatar sat quietly, letting him continue. "When you showed up at the gala wearing designer clothes and clearly thriving, my first instinct was to be angry that you deceived us. But you're right, you didn't deceive anyone. You just didn't share information we had no right to demand. The deception was ours, pretending we cared about family when we really only cared about control." "Why are you telling me this?" Ivatar asked. "Because I don't want to lose my grandchildren. Not because of money or pride or anything else. I want to know them, really know them. Not as Van Carthen heirs or trust fund recipients, but as Chase, Apollo, and Shelley. As the children my son loved enough to change his entire life for." "Tell me about your financial situation," Ivatar said bluntly. "The real situation." Richard sighed. "I overextended the business. Made acquisitions based on market projections that didn't pan out. I'm not bankrupt, but I'm stressed. The loan I secured helps, but it's a band-aid on a larger problem. And you thought access to the Children's Trust Fund would help solve that problem. At first, yes. Not to steal from them, but to use as working capital that I would have paid back with interest. It would have been legal, technically, as trustee, but it would have been wrong. Thank you for admitting that. I'm also selling controlling interest in Van Carthen Development to a private equity firm. It's not what I wanted, but it's the right move. The company will survive and potentially thrive under new management. I'll remain as a consultant. The estate is no longer leveraged. My personal finances are stabilizing. So you don't need the children's money anymore. I never needed it. I just convinced myself I did because it was easier than admitting I'd made mistakes." Richard leaned forward. "What would it take for you to trust me? Not immediately, but eventually?" Ivatar had thought carefully about this moment. Consistency. Show up for the children not when it's convenient, but when they need you. Learn their interests, their dreams, their fears. Stop seeing them as mini Van Carthens and start seeing them as individuals. I can do that. Respect boundaries. My home is not your home. My decisions are not up for debate. I'm their mother, not a co-parent with you and Veronica. Agreed. And respect me. Not because I have money now, but because I'm a person worthy of respect. The woman you looked down on when I had nothing is the same woman sitting here now. The only thing that changed is your knowledge of my bank account. If you can't respect me regardless of wealth, then you can't truly be in our lives." Richard was quiet for a long moment. "You're absolutely right, and I'm ashamed that it took your wealth for me to see your worth. That says something terrible about my character." "Yes, it does. But recognizing it is a start." That evening, a courier delivered an envelope to Ivatar's house. Inside was a handwritten letter from Veronica. "Dear Ivatar, I'm not good with verbal apologies. I've spent my life in circles where we apologize for minor social infractions but never for real harm. So I'm writing this instead. When Quentin brought you home, I saw a threat. You were beautiful, intelligent, kind, and you loved my son in a way that took him away from me. Not physically, but emotionally. He chose you over family expectations, over social position, over everything I thought mattered. I resented you for that. And when he died, I blamed you because blaming you was easier than accepting that the world is random and cruel and takes people we love without reason. Throwing you out was the worst thing I've ever done. Watching you pack your things, seeing those 3 little children confused and frightened, knowing I was doing this to them just weeks after they lost their father. I knew it was wrong, even as I did it. But I was so angry, so broken, I couldn't stop myself. I assumed you would struggle and eventually come back, asking for help. I thought I would have leverage then, a way to maintain control and assuage my guilt by rescuing you. When you didn't come back, when months passed and you didn't call begging for assistance, I told myself you were too proud. I never imagined you didn't need us at all. Learning about your inheritance at the gala, seeing how you've built a good life for the children without any help from us, realizing that you're not just surviving but thriving. It forced me to face something I've been avoiding. You never needed the Van Carthen money or status. You just needed basic human decency, and we couldn't even give you that. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. but I'm asking for a chance to be a grandmother to those children, not a controlling matriarch, not a society lady shaping them into appropriate heirs, just a grandmother who wants to know them and love them. If you can allow me that chance, I promise to respect your boundaries, your decisions, and your role as their mother. I promise to see you as the remarkable woman Quentin saw, not as an obstacle to overcome. With sincere regret, Veronica. Ivatar read the letter twice, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And honesty was what she had been asking for all along. 2 months later, the Leonard Hayes Foundation held its first major fundraising gala. Ivatar had resisted the idea initially, preferring to work quietly behind the scenes. But Harold Santos, the foundation's director, convinced her that visibility would help them raise more money and help more people. Your story is powerful, Harold argued. The daughter of a maintenance supervisor who inherited a fortune built on her father's faith and patience, now using that fortune to help families in crisis. People will connect with that. The gala was at a hotel ballroom, modest compared to the Van Carthen benefit, but beautifully done. Ivatar wore a simple but elegant gown and spent the evening talking to donors about the foundation's work. She told stories about the families they had helped. The single mother who avoided eviction and kept her children in their school district, the father who received job training and now had stable employment, the 3 kids who received scholarships to attend college despite their family's financial struggles. I was that family less than a year ago, Ivatar told the assembled donors. I stood at the edge with nowhere to go and 3 children depending on me. My father's gift gave me security. But more than that, it gave me the ability to be that gift for someone else. That's what this foundation represents. The belief that everyone deserves a chance, that poverty isn't a personal failure, and that strategic help at the right moment can change the trajectory of an entire family. The speech received a standing ovation and raised over $2 million for the foundation's programs. Rita Kowalski, Ivatar's former boss from the diner, attended the gala. Ivatar had sent her an invitation, not sure if she would come. Look at you, Rita said, hugging Ivatar tightly. I knew you were something special when you worked for me, but this, honey, this is incredible. You gave me work when I needed it most, Ivatar said. You fed my children and slipped me money when you thought I wasn't looking. You're the reason we survived those months. And you turned around and changed my whole life with that check. I paid off my debts, renovated the diner, hired more staff so I could actually take a day off occasionally. You gave me a second chance at my own business. You earned it by being kind to someone who had nothing. Rita wiped her eyes. I'm proud of you, girl. Really proud. Richard and Veronica attended the gala as well, having been invited by Ivatar. They came with a substantial donation and spent the evening quietly observing. Ivatar watched them interact with Chase, Apollo, and Shelley, who were being allowed to stay for the first hour of the event. Veronica sat with Shelley, looking at the child's drawings of the families the foundation helped. Richard listened seriously as Chase explained a chess strategy he was working on. Both grandparents seemed genuinely engaged, asking questions and offering encouragement without the controlling undertones that used to characterize every interaction. Later in the evening, Veronica approached Ivatar privately. The work you're doing here is remarkable, she said. Quentin would be so proud of you. Thank you. I was thinking. The Van Carthen Family Trust has significant assets that we use for charitable giving. I'd like to propose making the Leonard Hayes Foundation one of our primary beneficiaries. A $5 million commitment over 5 years. Ivatar studied her former mother-in-law carefully. That's generous. What are the conditions? No conditions. No naming rights, no board seats, no control over how you use the funds. Just a donation in Quentin's memory, supporting work that aligns with values he held dear. He did care deeply about helping people, Ivatar said softly. He used to volunteer at youth centers, mentor kids from challenging backgrounds. He never talked about it publicly, but it mattered to him. I know. He got that from his grandmother, my mother. She believed privilege came with responsibility. Somehow, I lost sight of that over the years. But watching you, seeing how you're using your resources, you've reminded me what actually matters. Late that night, after returning home and tucking the exhausted children into bed, Chase called out to Ivatar as she was leaving the room. Mama? Can I ask you something? Of course, baby. Why didn't you tell Grandma and Grandpa about the money right away? When they were being mean, Ivatar sat on the edge of his bed. That's a really good question. I guess I wanted to know if they could love you for who you are, not what you represent or what money might be involved. Does that make sense? I think so. Like, you wanted to know if they loved us or just loved that we're Van Carthens? Exactly. Chase thought about this. Do they love us now? Really love us? I think they're learning how. Real love takes time. It's not just a feeling. It's actions, choices, showing up consistently. They're working on it. Like how you love us. I love you absolutely and unconditionally. You are my whole heart. But yes, like that. Chase smiled sleepily. I love you too, Mama. You're the best person I know. The following spring, Ivatar stood in the backyard of a new property she had purchased. It wasn't a mansion, but it was larger than the house on Willow Creek Road, with enough space for the children to grow and for her to host foundation events occasionally. She hadn't sold her father's house. Instead, she renovated it completely and turned it into the foundation's headquarters, a symbolic full-circle moment. The place where she had struggled was now the place where she helped others struggling. The new house had a big kitchen where the children did homework while she cooked, a library where they could all read together, and a yard where they could play. It was comfortable and lovely without being ostentatious. The triplets were turning 7, and Ivatar threw them a birthday party in the new backyard. She invited their school friends, Mrs. Patterson, Rita, Dr. Phillips, and yes, Richard and Veronica. She watched as the children played, running through the grass, laughing without reservation. They were happy, healthy, secure. They knew they had money, but it hadn't changed their fundamental kindness or their appreciation for what mattered. Richard was manning the grill, having volunteered to help. Veronica was organizing party games with military precision but also laughing when things went chaotic. They had both softened over the months, learning to be present without being controlling. You've built something beautiful here, Douglas Freeman said, appearing at Ivatar's side with a glass of lemonade. Not just the house, the whole life. My father built it, Ivatar corrected. I'm just living it. Your father provided the resources. You provided the wisdom, the character, the love. Those aren't things money can buy. Later, as guests were leaving, Veronica helped Ivatar clean up. They worked side by side in comfortable silence for a while before Veronica spoke. I've been seeing a therapist, working through my grief, my prejudices, my need for control. It's been illuminating and painful. That's brave, Ivatar said sincerely. I learned that I resented you partly because you represented a world I didn't understand and couldn't control. Your love for Quentin was so pure, so uncomplicated by the things I thought mattered. Social position, wealth, reputation. It exposed how transactional my relationships had become. Even with my own son. Quentin loved you, Ivatar said gently. He just wanted you to see people, including me, as humans first and social categories second. I'm trying to do that now. It's harder than it should be, unlearning decades of prejudice. But I'm trying. That's all anyone can ask. Veronica turned to face Ivatar directly. Thank you for giving us another chance. With the children. With you. You didn't have to. No, I didn't. But I wanted to. For them, and honestly, for Quentin. He loved his family despite their flaws. I think he would want his children to know you, to understand where he came from. He chose well when he chose you, Veronica said softly. I see that now. As the sun was setting and the last guests were leaving, Richard asked to speak with Ivatar privately. They walked to the edge of the property, where newly planted trees were beginning to take root. The business sale finalized last week, he said. I'm officially no longer in control of Van Carthen development. It's strange, giving up something I built my life around. How do you feel about it? Relieved, mostly. I've been defining myself by business success for so long. I forgot there were other ways to measure a life. Watching you with the children, seeing the foundation's work, attending Chase's chess tournaments and Shelley's art shows and Apollo's math competitions. I'm learning what I missed with Quentin. I'm trying not to miss it with his children. They notice when you show up, Ivatar said. It matters to them. It matters to me too, more than I expected. Richard paused. I owe you an apology I've never properly given. Not just for how we treated you after Quentin died, but for how we treated you during his life. We made you feel unwelcome in your own home. We criticized and undermined you. We treated you as less than because of your race and your background. That was wrong. It was cruel, and I'm deeply sorry. It was the apology Ivatar had needed to hear. Thank you for saying that. It was cruel. It hurt. but I've made peace with it." "Have you? Really?" "Mostly. I'm working on it, same as you're working on change. Some days are easier than others." "That's fair." That evening, after everyone had gone and the children were asleep, Ivatar sat on her back porch with a cup of tea. She could see the lights of the city in the distance, including the area where the Van Carthen estate stood and the neighborhood where her father's old house, now the foundation headquarters, was located. She thought about the journey of the past year, from poverty to wealth, from powerlessness to influence, from grief to gradual healing. The money had changed her circumstances, but not her core values. She was still the woman who had worked double shifts to feed her children. She was still the daughter Leonard Hayes had raised with love and hope. She was still the wife Quentin had chosen despite his family's disapproval. But she was also more than those things now. She was a philanthropist building something that would outlast her. She was a mother raising children who understood both privilege and compassion. She was a woman who had faced rejection and emerged stronger. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "The foundation board meeting is confirmed for Thursday. The scholarship program proposal looks excellent." Another text from Dr. Phillips. "Chase mentioned he wants to talk about his father next session. He's ready to process more. Beautiful progress." And finally, a text from Veronica. "Thank you for today. The children are blessed to have you. We're blessed to be allowed back into their lives." Ivatar smiled at that last message. It wasn't perfect reconciliation, but it was honest progress. The Van Carthens were learning, growing, trying. That was enough. She thought about her father's letter, the one she still kept in her nightstand drawer. His words echoed in her mind. "This money doesn't change who you are. It just gives you more tools to be the amazing woman I always knew you were." He had been right. The inheritance hadn't changed her character. It had simply revealed it, tested it, and ultimately strengthened it. Inside the house, she could hear one of the children stirring. Probably Shelley, who often woke with nightmares about losing her father. Ivatar rose to go comfort her, as she had done countless times before. This was her life now. Beautiful house, secure future, meaningful work, healing relationships. But the core of everything was still the same as it had been in the tiny house on Willow Creek Road with rust-colored water and a leaking roof. Her children, her love for them, her determination to give them not just material security, but emotional safety, moral grounding, and the understanding that their worth had nothing to do with their bank account or their last name. They were Chase, Apollo, and Shelley. They were Leonard Hayes' grandchildren and Quentin Van Carthen's children. They were heirs to both a fortune and a legacy of resilience. But most importantly, they were loved. Absolutely, unconditionally, fiercely loved. And in the end, Ivatar thought as she climbed the stairs to comfort her daughter, that was the inheritance that truly mattered. Money could be lost, estates could crumble, businesses could fail. But love, real love, endured. That was what her father had really left her. Not $400 million, but the certainty that she was worthy of love, capable of greatness, and strong enough to handle whatever life brought her way. She had been unaware of her inheritance for months while the Van Carthen family threw her and her children out. They had seen her as nothing, as disposable, as someone whose worth was measured by her utility to them. They had been wrong. She had always been valuable, always been strong, always been remarkable. The money just gave the world a way to see what her father, her husband, and her children had known all along. Ivatar Mitchell Hayes Van Carthen was a force to be reckoned with. Not because of her wealth, but because of her character. The wealth just meant she could now use that character to change not just her own life, but the lives of countless others. And that, she thought as she gathered Shelley into her arms and whispered comfort into her daughter's curly hair, was the best kind of inheritance anyone could hope for. 5 years later, the Leonard Hayes Foundation had helped over 3,000 families avoid homelessness, provided job training to 1,500 people, and awarded college scholarships to 200 students. Ivatar's work had been featured in national publications, not because she sought attention, but because the results spoke for themselves. Chase, Apollo, and Shelley were thriving 12-year-olds who split their time between their mother's home and regular visits with their grandparents. They understood their privilege and their responsibility. Each had already started their own small charitable projects with their mother's guidance. Richard had become a mentor to several young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds, using his business expertise to help others avoid the mistakes he had made. Veronica served on the foundation's board and had become a genuine advocate for the families they served. The house on Willow Creek Road, now the foundation headquarters, had a plaque by the front door. Leonard Hayes believed in the power of patience, faith, and strategic investment. This building stands as a testament to his vision and his daughter's commitment to helping others rise. And Ivitar? She had found peace. Not the absence of challenges, but the confidence that she could handle whatever came. She had transformed pain into purpose, rejection into resilience, and an unexpected inheritance into lasting change. Her father had been right. The money was just a tool. What mattered was the woman wielding it. And that woman, shaped by poverty and privilege, by loss and love, by rejection and redemption, was exactly who she needed to be.
Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.